Will the Committee of Supply please come to order? This section of the Committee of Supply will now consider the estimates of Executive Council. Does the Honourable First Minister have an opening statement? No. Well, we thank the Minister for that. Does the Leader of the Official Opposition have an opening statement? Yes. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair, and also thanks in advance to the staff who are joining us here today, both in terms of those with Executive Council and those who work for the Legislative Assembly, clerks and Hansard and security staff. Also thank the First Minister in advance for the time we're going to spend here in estimates. I just want to note that, you know, there's a lot of speculation and whatnot, and I'm not going to ask the Premier to comment on it, but it is significant to me that perhaps it's the last time to spend in estimates together, depending on what choice he makes later on in the year. Lots of media speculation he may be moving on, so I just wanted to put it on the record that if this is, in fact, the last opportunity we get to sit across the estimates table, that it's certainly been interesting to participate in this process over the years. And likewise with question period, etc. So I know that there's a lot going on in the government today with COVID, pandemic response, likely reopening plans in the near future, other, I guess, aspects of, you know, the economic recovery too. And that's in addition to all the normal operation of government. So certainly a lot to dive into here. You know, just I guess by way of giving a heads up to the First Minister and some staff, just so they kind of know where I'd like to kind of discuss this afternoon, more so interested in some of that pandemic response, the stuff that's sort of kind of leading the news these days, and that way we just kind of start with some of those points there. So again, we know that it's been, it's a very challenging time, very taxing time for people in Manitoba, and there's been a lot going on when it comes to the pandemic. 560 cases today, I believe, and without adjusting, as has happened on some other dates, that is, I believe, the highest single day we've had prior to those adjustments. And so this third wave, definitely not something to be ignored, very, very serious, and certainly is going to mean continued diligence in terms of the hospitalizations, the ICUs, and the other impacts of the pandemic response. Beyond that, we also know that there's needs in the hospitals, the rest of the healthcare system, long-term care, and so these are, of course, some issues that we're very keen to look into. But again, with a particular focus on Executive Council, you know, like to understand how the processes are working in terms of coordinating that response, how is the decision-making being carried out, how are these decisions being delegated down through the organization, etc. So I think with those comments out of the way, just want to, again, start our estimates in a good way and just put a few thoughts on the record at that high level.
We thank the Leader of the Official Opposition for those remarks. Under Manitoba practice, debate on the Minister's salary is traditionally the last item considered for a department in the Committee of Supply. Accordingly, we shall defer consideration of line item 2.1 brackets A and proceed with consideration of the remaining items referenced in Resolution 2.1. Given that the estimates of Executive Council consist of only one resolution, the discussion will proceed in a global manner. I would like to remind the participants that when you have 1 minute remaining in your question or answer, I will flash the sign, because before I could make eye contact, but because of the distance. And I would also like a clear indication as to when you are ready to speak, because I don't want to signal the recorder to put, you know, the microphones on if you're not ready, because then they go on and you may not be ready. So I'll ask for a clear signal as to when, also because of the distance that we are here. The floor is now open for questions. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you for your instruction there, Mr. Chair, and we'll do our best to abide by all of that which you just shared. So for me, I think one of the significant things, both as a parent, first and foremost, but also as a politician, this week has been the switch to remote learning. for schools. It affects a lot of families here in Winnipeg. It's affecting a lot of families in Brandon. We've definitely heard from a lot of folks about that. We've also heard from some folks unaffected, if you will, people outside of those two regions, but still in Manitoba, who have questions about their schools as well. So we understand that there was a hint at this made by Dr. Roussin in his evening press conference on Friday. There was some other conversations, perhaps some other commentary at other press conferences, but I think the big thing that stands out is Dr. Roussin's hint on Friday night. The actual announcement about the switch to remote learning, it followed on Sunday, early afternoon. And then the switch actually took effect Wednesday. And so on the one hand, not a lot of notice to parents, but on the other hand, seemingly a delay there on the part of the government announcing the switch to remote learning. So I want to ask the Premier if the delay in making the announcement was caused by cabinet infighting over whether or not to announce a switch to remote learning.
The Honourable First Minister.
No, but the member has just alluded to notice being given, and that's important to give school staff, officials, parents time to adjust and adapt. If the announcement had been made by Dr. Roussin on the Friday and incorporated on Monday, they would have had 3 days' notice. The announcement was made on Sunday, and 3 days' notice was given then instead. There's ongoing discussion around all issues throughout this pandemic. There are coordinating committee participants who engage in regular discussion on a wide array of issues, and clearly the issue of closing schools is a major issue of importance to all Manitobans. And I want to say to the member, too, in the spirit of cooperation, that I know there may be some speculation also about whether he will be staying on as leader of the NDP, and so I want to say to him in equal fraternity that I've enjoyed our engagements together here and many times in the House, and so I wish him all the best in his future endeavors as well.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
The issue notice is significant because, for example, many high school students in Winnipeg only attend school every third day, which means that many of those students wouldn't have had the opportunity to see their teachers before they had to switch to remote learning. So the decision and the notice period was insufficient. And I would note that the Minister of Education said in the House this week that the government knew for a week that schools had to close. So when exactly was the decision taken that schools would have to switch to remote in Winnipeg and Brandon?
The Honourable First Minister.
I don't think the member's accurate in his representation of what the minister said, and so I would put that on the record, Mr. Chair. I would also say that throughout this pandemic we have followed public health advice, and obviously in the issue of schools, there's interface on an ongoing basis with educational leaders throughout our province. Not a decision to undertake without that kind of due consideration. Any closure of a school has impacts that are indisputable. Non-closure of schools also has an impact. We saw an increased number of cases over the last 2 or 3 weeks within our schools, among staff and students. And so it was felt that it was the appropriate action to take in those areas the member referred to earlier in Winnipeg and Brandon. We had, previous to that time, worked with educational authorities throughout the province on the closure of some schools where there had been outbreaks. Too numerous. I mean, any outbreak, any case of COVID is too many, but when there are a significant number of cases within a school community, or they're trying to appear to be transmitting among students within the school, I think that would be, I don't want to misrepresent the scientists on this, but I think that's generally the rationale for when it gets to a certain point, moving to remote learning situation for at least a time. That was undertaken in several schools as well prior to this time. So each one of these cases is, as the member quite rightly points out, important to deliberate upon and to do so cooperatively. So that's the approach we've taken throughout this pandemic.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
So the Minister of Education said, and Hansard shows this, that they knew schools would have to close for a week. The Premier now says that they were watching cases rise over the last 2 to 3 weeks. So I would like to know, when was the actual decision made to switch those schools to remote learning?
The Honourable First Minister.
I don't think the member has a gotcha moment. There were hundreds of cases over the last 2 weeks, and that's a reality. The situation was clearly escalating, as it has throughout other provinces. The decisions around school closures are of major impact. One has to weigh, obviously, the safety of staff and students, but at the same time, the recognition has to be there that children learn far better in schools. And so I think the consensus view would be to, as much as possible, try to keep the schools open. Manitoba has had, in partnership with our school officials, great success in doing that up until these recent days. Similar in terms of the numbers of COVID cases, lower in Manitoba than in most other jurisdictions outside of, I would say, New Brunswick, PEI, Newfoundland, 2 of the 3 on island. We've, as people in Manitoba, and I give the people of Manitoba the credit for this, in following health orders, which is important to do. Manitobans have done an impeccable job of holding back the 3rd wave, but we're not an island here in Manitoba, and cases have started to rise, though later than other jurisdictions. I would note, for example, by comparison, Saskatchewan, up until the last numbers I've seen were, I believe, Monday, up-to-date Monday, had almost 10,000 more COVID cases than Manitoba has had year-to-date. It's not good to have any COVID cases. And we, yesterday, Mark, the opposition leader, and I both marked the sad occasion in the House, and that was the reaching of a threshold of 1,000 Manitobans who've lost their lives. We know that this pandemic has had ravaging effects on families, on businesses, on communities, and it's going to continue to. But we need to stay focused on doing the right thing at the right time, and we've done our best to do that. And it's the case with schools. It's the case with every issue we've undertaken.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
So how many days before Sunday's announcement was the decision taken to switch schools in Winnipeg and Brandon to remote learning?
The Honourable First Minister.
The dialogue has been ongoing around whether or not to close schools, whether individually or collectively throughout the pandemic. This issue has never been off the table, regardless of the fact that early on we had no cases. As we know, throughout most of last year, getting into September, they began to rise. The dialogue was always there with school officials on an ongoing basis. We proceeded with school closures out of an abundance of caution early on. As a member, I can get the dates for the member if you'd like. I think it was early on, perhaps as early as March of last year. With caution, we moved right to remote learning. We proceeded to supply significant investments. We've had the Safe Schools funding, $160 million to help with COVID-related costs coming up in this fiscal year. That's not insignificant. The funding issues arise in part because, of course, there are additional transitional investments that have to be made to help our educators and in fact, to assist them in providing and revising their techniques of educating their children that are in their care. Invested over $4 million in a virtual learning strategy. I've had some interface with teachers. I have a few teachers in my circle. I suppose every member of the legislature does, but they have told me they've learned a lot through this process, and a lot they've learned the hard way. Some of the good things that have happened, though, as a consequence, if you can take this forward, are increased use of technology. For example, being able to provide visual lessons to students who are way ill. Some of these things will be able to be used by educators going forward after we get this COVID thing dealt with, to assist in helping with additional instruction when necessary. Some students have have challenges in terms of regular attendance. This is an opportunity to provide them with more learning materials and ongoing reinforcement using technology. So I'm hearing from educators that they actually are excited to take the lessons of the pandemic and use them to assist them in their careers as they move forward, to use what they can to assist their students. Sometimes it is out of these challenging times that we come up with skills and adapt as people to assist ourselves with those hard lessons, with those challenges, to assist ourselves in doing a better job going forward. And again, this is one of the byproducts that I think educators are saying they are hoping to see happen as a consequence of this. I know the member will echo this, but I have tremendous respect for the educators and staff of our schools who have been faced with such a challenge through this pandemic. I only had a brief time as a teacher, but I enjoyed it, and I found it to be motivational and rewarding. I was able to help some young people who needed the help. And I can say that one of the challenging times we faced in our school, this is in a small community, well, I shouldn't say too small because I see the member for that area may be with us, but about 1,000 people, was when we had a flood and we had to close the school for a month. And this is, remember, this is a number of years ago, so the member will make a joke about my age, but the fact is, nonetheless, that we didn't have the internet. We didn't have Skype. We didn't have any of these resources, and we learned a lot through that process beyond the Gestetner about how to use what technology we had. In a lot of cases, it was just a phone to work to assist our kids in our care. And I know that teachers are adaptable and resolute in their jobs, and so I thank them and congratulate them and the staff, of course, of the schools that have been through a really challenging time throughout this COVID pandemic.
There's a member of the opposition staff that wishes to sit up front here. We would invite her up here. No? Okay. The leader of the official opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Will the First Minister undertake to tell us how many days ahead of this past Sunday's announcement the decision was taken to move schools in Winnipeg and Brandon to remote learning?
The Honourable First Minister.
Sure. So as I mentioned to the member earlier, the discussions around school closures are serious. They're undertaken in theory on a regular basis and then applied only when necessary and to protect the safety and well-being of students and staff. As the case numbers rise, clearly that raises the importance of or the possibility of a closure being invoked. But there are other measures in the interim period that can also be taken, of course, like classes themselves being moved to remote learning as opposed to whole schools and things like that, interim steps. On the issue of the closures, discussions were ongoing. Dr. Roussin, as the member alluded to, announced that school closures was under discussion on the Friday announcement when he let the details come out on the new restrictions. I had announced earlier in the day that Dr. Roussin would be announcing new restrictions. Dr. Roussin then announced those restrictions following his ability to get out of court, which was impeded his ability to join me earlier in the day, which the member and I might agree on what we think about that court challenge, but I would hope we would. In any case, it's a right of people to go to court if they wish. We understand that, we accept that. Saturday, the discussions proceeded further. I am told the decision was finalized on this Saturday by my clerk. It was finalized on the Saturday and announced on the Sunday. So that addresses the timing issue the member was asking about.
The leader of the official opposition.
So returning to the impact on, you know, families and teachers and others, the children themselves, teenagers themselves who have to respond to this, why was the decision made on the Wednesday as opposed to Tuesday or as opposed to Thursday? What was the thought process in terms of settling on a 2 days notice period? Again, laying out for some high school students, 3 days notice would allow them to see the teachers in person. I'm sure we could come up with other scenarios where maybe the 2-day notice period would have been better. So can the Premier explain why the decision was made to come out on Sunday and then close the schools or switch to remote on Wednesday?
The Honorable First Minister.
Yeah, it's a fair question. You know, it's a difficult one too. Not just for schools, but for other restrictions, right? The restrictions that we've introduced have been some say too severe, some say not severe enough, some say too soon, some say too late. Nonetheless, overall, according to an Oxford University study, it was granted that was done 2 months ago, we have had the toughest restrictions in our province of any province outside of the Atlantic bubble. We've maintained travel restrictions. We've done a variety of things. What we've tried to do is not yo-yo. We've tried to avoid that, but this third wave is here now, and so we introduced some tough restrictions 3 weeks ago, strengthened them again 2 weeks ago, and then really strengthened them last week. It is our hope that the consequence of the restrictions, in particular on home gatherings, if I can call them that. And I may get the member will excuse me if I don't use the right scientific terms. I hope I'll try to communicate as a layperson what our health experts are telling us. But I understand that the gatherings outside are safer than inside, but that either way, gatherings in dwellings and gatherings in domestic circumstance, even outside, can lead to transmission and certainly lead to a greater possibility of it. And so we introduced some strong restrictions to limit that to about 2.5 weeks ago, and then again said no to that particular issue entirely here this past week, and also limited the amount of interaction on allowed in businesses by reducing that, and capped the amount of people that could be at various gatherings in public spaces, and now have reduced that very significantly too. And again, these measures have been more restrictive than many other provinces. BC, for example, Premier Horgan, who we've enjoyed working together. I can say this is not said in any way as a criticism of his government, but they made the decision not to restrict retail except to encourage social distancing, and that's what they've stayed with. They had much larger impacts in the third wave for a number of weeks before it came to Manitoba. We had restrictions in place on retail, limiting capacity to 50%, then took it down to 33 1/3, then took it down to 25, and now 10. And the reason I give this preamble to members is to say on each of those, as well as with this, we considered the timing and the advance notice issues very seriously, because there's an impact for families. The education experts in our government told us that we needed 48 hours to give a window so students would be able to gather up materials, textbooks, the like, from their schools. And I should also mention we've also made the decision to allow for the children of essential workers, frontline workers, for example, to be able to have their children continue in the school if that was necessary to allow workers to be in the workplace. And numerous other aspects of this decision that were undertaken with great seriousness and consideration for the impacts they would have. So giving notice in advance is a point the member has made. It's an important one. Tried not to do anything that would add to the already stressful times that Manitobans are experiencing, but we know that these restrictions and school closures are hard on people. We also know why they're necessary in this time of the onslaught of these variants, in particular multiplying the ability of COVID we have to multiply our efforts to fight against COVID.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
So a number of scenarios are brought forward to the Premier. Closed schools in Winnipeg and Brandon, closed schools across southern Manitoba. Why was the decision taken to close schools in Winnipeg and Brandon as opposed to the other scenarios?
The Honourable First Minister.
I just appreciate some clarification. Is the member asking why we didn't close schools other than Winnipeg and Brandon? Or is he suggesting we shouldn't have closed the schools in Winnipeg and Brandon? I'm just not quite clear on that.
Could the Leader of the Official Opposition clarify that, please?
Why did the Premier choose the scenario that we were pursuing this week as opposed to other scenarios that were presented to him? Again, there's a few scenarios presented to the First Minister: close all schools in southern Manitoba, close schools in Winnipeg and Brandon. Why this course of action?
The Honourable First Minister.
It's a course of action recommended to us by educational leaders in our province.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
And which educational leaders were those?
The Honourable First Minister.
Well, members of the healthcare team consult regularly with individuals who want a list of individual names. I could ask the member if he wants a list of individual names. I'd be happy to. I don't have them with me, but I'd be happy to pull them together. And I should mention, as the member knows, that I have always produced materials when I undertake to produce them for the member, and so I will continue to do that.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
I will undertake that undertaking, sure. Yeah.
The Honourable First Minister.
So I'm glad that the member is, I wasn't aware the member was an undertaker until now, but I'm pleased that he's decided to take that on. The reality of this situation is that we do owe a real debt of gratitude to our advisory team. We have, each of us, the opposition leader and I have sincerely thanked our frontline workers on numerous occasions, continue to do that, but I think it's fair to say that our folks in the civil service are throughout, whether within core government or in our crowns or in the so-called mush sector, deserve a real pat on the back as well. It hasn't been an easy time for anybody. Our municipal officials have faced some tremendous challenges. At the universities, we know that the administration has faced incredible challenges, staff there as well. And so it's not meant to leave anyone out to say that it's, you know, COVID has been an equal opportunity stress maker for a lot of people throughout our province, and I know that the member agrees, and we appreciate the work of those folks.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
So when did this recommendation come forward to the First Minister?
The Honourable First Minister.
Recommendations, I said earlier, came to our coordinating committee on the Saturday, and the recommendation was adopted and then made public on Sunday.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
And why weren't school leaders and educators notified of the decision? The fact that it happened on a Sunday, parents left in the lurch, they want answers, they can't call a school on a Sunday. Why was the decision made without notifying folks in advance?
The Honourable First Minister.
Yeah, I don't know if the member's implying there's a magic day when it's stress-free to close a school, and of course that's not true. There isn't such a day. Educational leaders throughout the province were notified when the decision was taken. They knew before it was announced publicly, I understand. So the information was out there to them, and then of course it becomes a regional responsibility in part, in tandem with Dr. Roussen's announcement, public announcement, and the Minister of Education's announcement to get that word out and give families the time to prepare.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
So if the Premier is to believe, educational leaders recommended this, the decision came forward on Friday, why not notify them Friday that this was an active consideration, that this was likely to happen?
The Honourable First Minister.
I can only say there's ongoing interaction and communication between the educational leaders throughout our province and the coordinating committee. that dialogue is on an ongoing basis. The decision, as I said twice before, wasn't made until the Saturday and then was made public on the Sunday.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
So what information came available on the Saturday that meant that that decision had to be taken then instead of earlier?
The Honorable First Minister.
I can get something for the member in writing about the criterial considerations that the committee looks at in respect to this. I'm a lay person. I can only tell him that I would assume that because of increasing presence of COVID within classes, that there would be a clear indication that some further action would need to be taken.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
The Premier could provide the criteria, but then also what the information was that became available on Saturday as opposed to Friday or earlier in the week. Like, what new piece of information came out on Saturday that led to a decision that couldn't have been taken earlier?
The Honorable First Minister.
I've already undertaken to provide the criterial information to the member. I can only say I don't believe there's a precedent for this situation, at least in modern times. I'm looking at a portrait of a former Premier, the Honorable T.C. Norris, who, were he alive, might have been a valuable source of some advice to our government, because he was the Premier during the Spanish flu epidemic. He and maybe his compatriots could have helped us were they still with us. We've done our best to learn in what is virtually an unprecedented situation, as every government has, and have certainly taken action with consultative work with our experts that can always be criticized, and it is the job of the member opposite to some degree to cast doubt on the decisions that are taken. I can only say that they're not taken lightly. They're taken with due consideration. They're taken with an abundance of caution, and they are without precedent in the history of our province, at least in modern times.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
So there was a pandemic playbook created coming out of H1N1 in 2009, and included an assessment of the healthcare system and the capacity, revisiting of the ICU capacity within that healthcare system, specifically purchase of a stockpile of masks, etc. So I don't think it is accurate to say that it's completely without precedent. Perhaps the scale of the public health restrictions, the scale of COVID is greater than H1N1 was. Definitely would grant that, but I don't think we're in a situation where there hasn't been expert advice provided to this government and to previous ones. But again, you know, I think Manitobans are just wondering, why was this decision so last minute? You know, what was going on within government that led to this decision being forestalled for so long? The case counts were increasing. Publicly released data, though it lags considerably what is available to the government, was certainly moving in that decision. And, you know, the Premier continues to cite consultation. Every educator we talked to said they were never consulted. Teachers' societies putting up press releases. They have no idea what's going on in the machinations of government. Who are these folks that the government is talking to? What is going on around their cabinet table? What sort of infighting and wrangling over different scenarios presented to them led to the delay in the announcement that affected so many Manitoba families this week?
The Honorable First Minister.
It's a tangled web the member's trying to weave. I'd like him to go on record and put a date down that he wanted the schools closed before we go any further on this discussion, before he disparages any further the input we've received from educational and healthcare experts. I would like him to put on record when he thinks the schools should have been closed. If he'll do that, then we can go forward with a discussion, and it will have some significant advances. If he won't, then he's simply casting aspersions that I don't think are justified.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
There's an asymmetry in the information that is available to myself and to the public and the information that the Premier has available to him at his fingertips on an ongoing basis. Provide the modeling data effective as of today. Undertake to do that. Provide the projections for case counts effective today. Provide information on ICU projections effective today. Share that information with myself and the people of Manitoba, and I will gladly engage in a free and frank discussion. Can the Premier undertake to do that?
The Honorable First Minister.
I'm not aware of any other Premier that has undertaken to offer briefings to opposition leaders. maybe the member would like to declare for the record when his last briefing took place.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
So will the Premier undertake to give us that information generated today, later today? The reason why I phrase it that way is because, of course, there's a danger that we get projection data, 3 months from now or whenever the undertakings are returned to, and it's not relevant to the public conversation anymore. So would the Premier undertake to give us a projection data based on modeling when it comes to ICUs and case counts later today that he has access to?
The Honourable First Minister.
I'd invite the member to put on the record when his last briefing was. I arranged briefings for him and the non-third party leader to be able to get information. I did this in spite of the fact that on a previous briefing session that I offered to these individuals and their critics, apparently someone decided they'd take video of Dr. Roussin and Lynette Siragusa, I don't know who else was there on behalf of public health, and release that to the media. That wasn't a thing that was done with good faith. Nonetheless, I continue to try to offer information to the member on a timely basis. When was the last briefing that he was given? If he put that on the record, then perhaps we can have a further discussion about briefing material.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
Why does the Premier refuse to release information to Manitobans that they have paid for, that has been generated in their interest? Other provinces have done it. In Ontario, it led to compliance with public health orders and helped them in their fight against the third wave. British Columbia has released a lot of this information as well. It seems as though that would help in the current moment here in Manitoba. So why hide that data from Manitobans?
The Honourable First Minister.
Members, in not wanting to reveal when he had his most recent briefing, he's clearly not wanting to give support to the thesis that we are offering information to him. And it's unfortunate he wouldn't simply put on the record that he had a briefing this week, full briefing, that Dr. Roussin was available to him, but he doesn't want to say that because it's going to support his imaginary thesis. As far as his comments about information, I have been advocating for more information, not less, to be made available. But I do also have tremendous respect for our public health experts in terms of the decisions they make around releasing information. I can also say that he's blowing smoke when it comes to BC. If you read the Globe and Mail this week, he'd see an analysis by a noted columnist in that paper, an award-winning paper, I might add. I should commend the National Journalistic Awards this past weekend, cited, I believe, a dozen various reporters and journalists at the Globe and Mail receiving awards. And congratulations to them. Anyway, this columnist in the Globe and Mail cited the fact that BC was lagging in terms of making information available. And so this is not true, what he's just asserted, that British Columbia is somehow doing a better job than us releasing information, at least according to a well-informed columnist in the Globe and Mail. I can only say that the information that he's asked for has been released on a regular basis, that I understand there is a plan by the health officials to release even more information tomorrow, that information will be made public, as it should be, and that I'm glad of that. And I'd like the member to acknowledge that I have endeavored to make sure that he got updated information as well, because I have, and he knows that.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
BC's data set, which is published on an ongoing basis, includes information about school transmission. It breaks down where cases are coming in terms of geographic region, in terms of occupation, in terms of workplaces, other sectors. Ontario released projections based on their modeling. This information has never been released proactively in Manitoba. It's only been released after the fact in Manitoba. Manitobans have a right to know this information. Why isn't it released publicly?
The Honourable First Minister.
Well, it's fair. I think it's fair to say that the member doesn't have enough information. It's also fair for him to admit that he's been given the opportunity to get it and to be briefed on it and to question senior health leaders on their decisions in respect of releasing information. I have, honestly told the member that I have encouraged more information, not less, to be out there. I know that there are legitimate concerns from our healthcare leaders in respect of the potential damage that that might do in some cases. For example, I know that there was some information out early in respect of truckers, and then as a consequence, a number of truck drivers were victimized and vilified in a variety of venues across the province, and that was disappointing. It should have been disappointing to all of us. So they saw what happened when people were identified in certain categories or in certain manner as being exposed to COVID. I think I personally think it would be better to have more information out than less, but I stand by the decisions of our healthcare leaders in respect of when and how they release that information.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
So was there agreement at the cabinet table on the decision to close schools in Winnipeg and Brandon and switch them to remote learning?
The Honourable First Minister.
I'm accountable for the decisions that are taken. I'll continue to be, and so there sometimes is time for full cabinet deliberation, and sometimes there is not time. The nature of the decisions that have been taken throughout this pandemic is that they've followed a variety of different. I can't tell the member there's one formatted discussion process that happens for every single decision. There have been decisions taken, I would say, into the thousands now. And so this fell into the category of a decision where there was an opportunity for what is called a round-robin approval or a discussion, but not an actual meeting of cabinet.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
Well, I appreciate that insight that the Premier offers there. I think it's significant that the Premier puts on the record that the public health decisions are made at the cabinet level, and eventually fall to him. We've often heard him throughout the pandemic say it's up to Dr. Roussin, but he admits here this afternoon that it's in fact him and the cabinet that makes the decision, which I think is significant because, again, there's often questions, on multiple sides coming from multiple directions when these things happen. But I do think it's important for the Premier to state clearly that it is him and the cabinet that eventually makes these decisions. And so, that's certainly an important point in public accountability. So in terms of this decision-making process, and I acknowledge the term round robin, so I don't want to necessarily, misinterpret that, but just at what point did it become clear to the Premier that this was the important decision to take, to move the schools to the remote learning? And what was it that swayed him? What was that piece of information? What was that argument that he heard that made him decide, yep, I'm going to go ahead with this particular course of action?
The Honourable First Minister. Yeah, I wouldn't want the member to misunderstand, as he just did, demonstrate he has what I said. I said I was accountable for the decisions, glad to be, that our government is ready to embrace the accountability. I did not say we make all the decisions. He repeated that 3 times, but I welcome the accountability. I respect our public health leaders. I respect our vaccine team very much, and they are very influential in respect of the decisions we take. They have led the decision-making process. So I wouldn't want him to misrepresent or misunderstand what I just said, because it could be misconstrued, therefore, that we were, by what he just said, that somehow I or my cabinet was overruling willy-nilly the recommendations of various health officials, and that's not the case at all. That hasn't been the case throughout the pandemic. We've seen that accusation made in other provinces, primarily for political purposes, I think. Nonetheless, it's not an accusation which would bear fruit here in Manitoba.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
But just for clarity's sake, who does make the decision on a public health order?
The Honourable First Minister.
I've explained the process as best I can to the member. I've said that I'm accountable for all decisions. I've also said that the healthcare leaders of our province are the principal decision makers in terms of the recommendations that are made.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
And so is the Premier asserting that he has never overruled public health advice when it comes to a public health order?
The Honorable First Minister.
I am so asserting.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
So when was the advice given to make the announcement on Friday evening? When was the advice given that that was what was necessary in terms of new public health orders?
The Honorable First Minister.
As I've said 3 times before, the decision wasn't taken until Saturday, not Friday.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
See, this is what happens when the Premier doesn't show up for the announcements on public health. He neglects that there was an announcement of new restrictions on Friday night. When was the decision taken about those restrictions? When was the advice given to him that those restrictions were necessary?
The Honorable First Minister.
If the member wants to get into personal innuendo, I can get into facts instead. Does the member want to talk about absence from this place or from work? Because if he does, I can go into that in some detail with him, if that's where he wants to go. I've done over 130 announcements, good and bad. I've been available to the media. They can ask me any question they want. My accountability is well known. He can't even answer a simple question about whether he paid his taxes for 10 years before he got into politics. So if you want to deal with innuendo, keep doing it. I got facts. We can go down that road if that's where the member wants to go.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
Clearly touched a nerve there, Mr. Chair, by reminding the Premier of his absence on Friday night. So I'd repeat the question. When was the decision taken on those public health orders? When was the advice given to him?
The Honorable First Minister.
I can repeat my answer. It is the 5th time, and I'll repeat it again. The decision was taken on Saturday. The announcement was made by the Education Minister and Dr. Roussin on the Sunday. On the Friday prior, I made the announcement that public health orders were going to be changed. New restrictions were coming in on Friday morning at approximately 11:10. Dr. Roussin was unavailable. I prefer that Dr. Roussin make the announcements about public health orders because I believe, quite frankly, that that is the right course of action. We want to encourage people to follow public health orders, and I think it's better to have the senior medical people make those announcements. I am happy to be accountable for the decisions and recommendations that are made, but we have been very consciously trying to make sure that we have as many people follow those public health orders as possible. The member understands the importance of following public health orders, I hope, even though he hasn't always demonstrated that understanding in his behavior. But the fact remains that Dr. Roussin was unavailable on Friday morning to do the restrictions. I announced they were coming. He came after court at, I believe, 6 o'clock and announced the restrictions. The decision hadn't at that time been taken on the schools. There was further discussion on that undertaken, and in the next 12, 16, 18, 14, I don't know what number of hours, the decision was taken. Afternoon? Morning or afternoon of Saturday? Morning. In the morning on Saturday, the decision was taken. School officials were notified. Then was publicly announced on the Sunday by the Education Minister and Dr. Roussin.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
Like, nobody buys that. Like, I understand why the Premier is trying to rewrite history, to offer his revisionist take here, because obviously it was unpopular that he skipped the Friday night announcement. And so for him to now advance this argument that, dropping a hint in the morning is somehow him making an announcement on public health orders may kind of meet his own personal needs, but I don't think anyone outside of the Executive Council is going to buy that. Again, the flaw in that argument is why not come at 6 p.m. and make the announcement with Dr. Roussin? Why skip that announcement? It's an important moment for Manitobans. Why not use the office of the Premier to persuade them about the severity of the moment, about the urgency around public health orders? Why not use the role to elevate the announcement? Seems like a pretty straightforward use of the office of the Premier, a pretty important one, and yet the Premier wasn't there. Why wasn't he?
The Honorable First Minister.
I appreciate that the member wants to give me advice on a variety of things. I announced on Friday morning our stepped up enforcement measures. I also made the announcement about our increased penalties for violators of public health orders. I know he's sensitive to that because he himself violated the public health orders. I understand he was given a warning. I understand also his colleague from St. John's suggested we should throw the book at somebody else. I think she was probably implying we should have thrown the book at him as well. That being said, I understand his reluctance to accept accountability because I understand him. But I don't understand why he would suggest somehow that he should be lecturing me on setting an example when he himself refuses to do so.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
Where was he that he couldn't be there at Manitobans' moment of greatest need?
The Honorable First Minister.
Where was the member opposite for the bulk of last summer into the fall?
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
I was in the media in most days, so do your oppo correctly and you'll find an answer to that question. We were advocating for paid sick leave prior to the Premier glomming onto that issue. We were talking about the release of data, which is something that we continue to push for at this late date. And I think, you know, we really started to pick up on the dissatisfaction of Manitobans when we suggested that the government should provide COVID updates on the weekends too, since COVID doesn't take Saturday and Sunday off. So where was the Premier this past Friday that he couldn't be there for the announcement with Dr. Roussin? And why not use the office of the Premier to help persuade Manitobans about the importance of that moment?
The Honorable First Minister.
I think we touched a nerve with the member opposite because, of course, he doesn't want to share with Manitobans where he was for the bulk of last summer and into the fall. He also doesn't want to share with Manitobans whether, in fact, he revealed his past record, his criminal record prior to the 2016 campaign. Did he hide from the NDP his criminal record when he was being interviewed as a candidate, for example? So you know, no, well, you know, it's funny. The member can dish it out, but he can't take it. He uses innuendo, but he doesn't like facts. It's a simple question. Did the member hide his criminal record from the NDP when he was being interviewed as a candidate? Every candidate is interviewed by a political party. Any reputable political party would ask questions about the candidate to know what their background was. Did he hide his criminal record from the NDP prior to running in 2016? He ran against two women of color in Fort Rouge. Two women of color. There is zero reference in his book. His book, The Reason I Hide, contains no reference. He can laugh it off. He can. He's trying. See?
Order, please,
He's
gentlemen.
trying-
Let's
he's trying
try
to
to
laugh
keep
it off.
whoever has the floor, let them speak. The Honorable First Minister.
You know, the member wants to dish it out, but he can't take it here. Okay, so the member claims that he was accountable in his book. I've read his book. I've never seen me and I used quite so frequently, but I do know that in his book he references one criminal incident and misrepresents what actually happened. It is most certainly true. In fact, there is only one incident, and if he wants me to get into all of the various things that were omitted from the book, I can. I didn't come here wanting to do that. But if the member, I did not come here wanting to do that, but if the member wants to launch into personal attack, if that's what he's choosing to do, he has innuendo, I have facts. So he can keep going down this road if he wishes, but I want him to know that it was not my intention coming here today to do that. It was my intention to do my best to answer his questions. And if he wishes to go on personal attack with innuendo, with false accusation, I will go on facts.
press conference if you want
Well, the member...
Order,
Mr.
please. I would like a little bit of respect here for the chair so I can hear what's going on. I appreciate that everybody will have the ability to have the floor. The Leader of the Official Opposition.
Yeah, thanks. Let's please continue down this road. Again, the question is, where was he?
Sorry.
Where was he on Friday?
The Honorable First Minister.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yes, let's continue down this road. Why was the Premier not present at the Friday announcement of public health orders? Where was the Premier that he couldn't be there to use his office to help convince Manitobans about the importance of this moment?
The Honorable First Minister.
So I'm not going to give the member a promotion and put him in charge of my life. I'm going to leave that to my wife and my friends and people I respect. I'm not going to give him that privilege. But I am going to tell him that if he keeps going down this road, I'm going to ask him more questions, which he has not answered. And I've asked him one. I've asked him one question. Now, he's failed to answer that question, which proves to me he's not interested in being accountable at all. The fact of the matter is it's a relevant question. Because every candidate in every election should be accountable for presenting their real record to the electors. And every party should be accountable to making sure their candidates have done that. And so I'm just curious, that's all I'm asking. Because he did run against two fine people who did put their record out there, an honest record. And he did not do that. And so I'm simply asking, did he fail to provide his information to the NDP before he ran, or did he provide it and somehow they decided not to release it? Like, it's one or the other of those things. As far as my time is concerned, I can only say to the member that on Friday, I did an announcement of some significance, I think, to Manitobans, which was to make sure that people follow the public health orders by adding deterrents and penalties, strengthening what were already, I think, very strong measures that we've taken to make sure that Manitobans follow those orders. You know, there are two major areas of focus that if we follow them as people, and we have in the past, in the vast majority, that we need to take now to shorten this third wave. And they are to follow public health orders and to get vaccinated. And if we can all encourage people to do those two things, then we have a good chance, I think, to decrease the time period it will take to get our lives back. And if we fail to do that, then we are going to guarantee that the suffering we're seeing now will continue and persist. And so Friday, in a significant announcement, I think, we strengthened the penalties, doubled the penalties, in fact, for repeat offenders who would violate. So, for example, there was no penalty, there was a warning for the member opposite when he engaged in breaking the health rules. So I don't know how you double that penalty, give him 2 warnings. I don't think that's going to help. But for people who received a fine for a violation of the public health orders, they were told on Friday last in that press conference that fine will now double. We hope that that works to assist in deterring that behavior. We've also issued more tickets for our size than any other province, and we've upgraded the number of people who are involved in enforcement, and I thank all of those who are. These aren't easy jobs, you know. It's not easy to go and give someone a fine. Talk to anybody in the city police or in the RCMP, they know it's a difficult thing to do to enforce the laws. And for many of our folks, they haven't had to do this kind of work before. They've maybe inspected a boiler and given a warning. It's not quite the same thing to go out and tell a person who's organizing a group gathering that they shouldn't do that. It's difficult. And also, I know from some of our dialogue with the police services that it's also a difficult call on whether you wade into the middle of a public protest and start handing out tickets right in the middle of it, because you might accelerate the risks to others in the area and that type of thing. So I know that our officials have told me that they're have been other measures they've taken. For example, at the protest down at the Forks a couple of weeks ago, I think there've been 20-some tickets already issued, but only 2 at the time. If I remember, member will excuse me, I'll get the details if he wishes, but I think it's about that number, that they didn't give out a lot of tickets at the time. And so some might argue, well, they aren't really deterring it if they're not, given a ticket right then. But I think the reluctance on the part, I think in that case was Winnipeg Police were principally the ones doing the enforcement. They were concerned that if they waded into the crowd and started with the tickets, that they might provoke some violent response. So that was that was the concern. Anyway, the point is, it wasn't a small announcement on Friday. It was an important announcement. Undertook to do it, and Dr. Roussin did go ahead and announce the restrictions later in the day. I've been part of all but I think 2 of those announcements throughout the entire pandemic. There's fulsome responses. I can hope the member would like.
The First Minister's time has expired. The Leader of the Official Opposition.
So the facts are this. The Premier was not present at the Friday night announcement, which was significant because, again, it affects the rights of Manitobans. It's also significant because the announcement on Friday night included a question and answer period, which Dr. Roussin was left alone to respond to questions, whether they were clarification questions or accountability questions. Earlier this afternoon, the Premier said that he is accountable for the public health orders. So why was the Premier not there when the public health orders were announced so that he could be asked to account for them, so that he could be asked to answer accountability questions? Where was he? And why wasn't he there to be accountable for the public health orders that he's acknowledged today he should be held accountable for?
The Honourable First Minister.
Again, why did the member hide his criminal record prior to the 2016 campaign? These issues of accountability the member's raising are coming from a glass house. And the member's throwing stones at me, but he's in a dangerous predicament because the fact of the matter is I've done over 125 press conferences, been available to answer all questions from the media and make myself available on an ongoing basis. But I most certainly would, if there were questions about my record, I would answer them, and I have. But the member appears unwilling to put the same standard on himself, yet he is trying to attack me today. I don't think that's entirely fair. I think it's probably a little unfair. So, again, I asked the member, did he hide his criminal record from the NDP when he was auditioning to be a candidate in the 2016 election or not? If he didn't, he should say so. And if he did, he should say that now.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
So this afternoon, the Premier says he's accountable for the public health orders, and yet he refuses to show up to answer questions about them. And now, he refuses to answer the question asked several times about why he simply didn't show up. The thesis that a lot of Manitobans are circulating right now about why he doesn't show up is he only likes to be there for the good news announcements, and he never wants to show up for the bad news announcements. So I'd like to flesh that out a little bit more. A few weeks prior, there was a reference in a public health press conference to stronger restrictions coming later that week on a Friday. Instead, Friday came and went without an announcement of new public health restrictions. Instead, we saw that the Premier visited his hometown of Portage-la Prairie. So did the Premier skip town because he didn't want to have to make a bad news announcement on that Friday?
The Honourable First Minister.
No, you know, the member's hidden his record from his own party, apparently. If he hadn't, he'd say so. His own colleagues have to ask the question, what else is he hidden? I've been out there throughout this entire pandemic. press conference, you don't dodge anything at a press conference, a member knows that. Media can ask any question they want, so there's no such thing as an easy press conference and a hard press conference. They're all accountability sessions, and I've done over 125 of them so far. So all I can say to the member is wrong on this thesis. The fact of the matter is, I made an announcement not only about warnings, and I should mention May 3rd to 9th, 97 warnings, 50 $1,296 tickets, 9 $298 tickets, 1 $5,000 ticket. That's enforcement. That's what we're doing. We take very seriously these health orders that the member apparently does not take seriously, and that is unfortunate as well. I can also share with the member that our law enforcement officials have given per capita more tickets than most of the other provinces studied. In this report that I have, I can share with the member. It's not a secret report. About triple the rate of most other provinces studied. I wanted to be sure that we were doing the right things in terms of enforcement. So because I understand that it isn't just health restrictions, it's the willingness of people to follow them that matters. That's why I did the announcement on Friday morning concerning enforcement, because enforcement matters. As much as the member may not believe it, it does help, and it is helping now, and I thank the people that are doing it. I also announced in that press conference something else that I think that is pretty significant and important, which is something that this government has fought for from the get-go, and that the NDP was silent on, contrary for a long time, contrary to what the member put on the record earlier, and that is paid sick leave. And we made an announcement about a program for paid sick leave that we consider to be the strongest such program in the country right now. Now, it may be that other provinces will follow our lead. I know that some others may be talking about doing something else. BC just came out with a good program. I applaud Premier Horgan for his leadership in advancing paid sick leave. I did my best to help him. We together lobbied other premiers to join in calling on the federal government to introduce a national pandemic paid sick leave program. We did that sincerely together with the hopes that they would. The federal program has some flaws in it. Premier Horgan announced that, I think, the day before yesterday when he announced his own plan. These flaws are not limited to, but include no specificity as far, or clarity as far as whether a person could go and get a vaccine and actually have that leave paid to get that vaccine. We've asked, and I hope that the opposition leader will support this, that we have that legislated. We've also increased the amount, or introduced an amount of pay that people can get for a variety of reasons, and it doesn't, the problem with the federal program is it isn't clear on this. It's confusing. As members know, if they've talked to their constituents, there are a lot more questions than answers about the qualification aspects of the federal plan. What it does long-term is, I think, a sincere effort, and I thank the federal government for this. On a variety of fronts, they've been open, for the most part, cooperative in terms of a variety of endeavors we've pursued together or separately in communicating. But on this one, they undertook to do something they did not end up doing. And that's unfortunate, because the premiers were united in supporting this. I was really pleased when the opposition leaders stood up and supported this effort, as he did, on behalf of his party. I think it was an important thing to do. I was very pleased when the opposition joined with us in calling for a stronger support for healthcare transfers as well, and I thank the opposition leader for that. Right across the country, with the exception of our third party here in Manitoba, for some unknown reason. This is an issue we all agree on. We all agree on this need, and it's an imperative, because healthcare needs are rising and the need for supports is growing. So on that.
The Honourable First Minister's time has expired. The Leader of the Official Opposition.
So again, the fact remains that the Premier doesn't want to account for his whereabouts during these significant announcements. So I'd like to ask a question about the Sunday announcement. Why wasn't the Premier present for the announcement when it was said that schools would go remote.
The Honorable First Minister.
I'm not prepared to tell the opposition leader, frankly, or anybody but my wife where I am on a regular basis. Manitobans know that I have been here throughout this pandemic. I've been available all the time, and I'll continue to be. And so I think that's the effort that I've continued to demonstrate and will continue to demonstrate. As far as the member is concerned, he can't even confront the issue of whether he hid his criminal record from his party prior to the 17 leadership campaign. So I don't know if he disclosed it to the NDP when he was running. If he didn't, did he disclose it before he decided he was going to run for leader? That's, I think, another fair question he needs to answer.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
I know the question's ringing in his head. Where was he? Where was he? Where was he? But the question actually was why? Why wasn't he there? Why wasn't he there on Sunday? A lot of families had their Mother's Day plans interrupted. A lot of people put those on hold to try and put childcare, education, work plans into place for just a few days later. Seems like a reasonable question that the person who leads the province could be there to help explain, offer advice, and yeah, based on his answers earlier this afternoon, even be held accountable to answering some questions. So since the Premier invites the question, I'll ask it. Where was he on Sunday during the announcement when Manitobans learned that schools in Winnipeg and Brandon would go remote?
I would like to remind the members that when addressing somebody in the chamber, they should be addressed by their title or by their constituency, like as you and him and he. I don't know if that's proper etiquette in here or not, but the Leader of the Official, or sorry, the Honorable First Minister.
Mr. Chair, you're really glad that you have that job right now, don't you? You're happy about that, yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for taking on the job of chairing committees. It's not an easy job. I don't think the member was trying to address. I'm not questioning your admonition. I don't think he was trying to address me directly. Interesting his tactics, though, because that's all this is anybody who's watching knows, including his colleagues. It's an attempt to distract. So the question of availability, I've been putting in 60, 70, 80-hour weeks for the last 16 months. I'm not going to stop. This pandemic is all I think about, quite frankly. And as far as his previous attacks, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, he alluded in the House to the fact that something like, I make all the decisions and nobody in my cabinet has any say, or something to that effect. So he wants it both ways. He wants me to be the dictator and control freak on the one hand, and on the other hand, he wants me to not be there and have somebody else doing it. Well, in this case, we made sure that our education minister, who is accountable and responsible for his department, was there, made that announcement. I thought did a good job of doing his job, and I applaud him for doing that. So again, I made major announcements on the Friday that I think were important in respect of supporting public health rules, which were strengthened by Dr. Roussen's announcement later in the day. It's important to have both. It's not enough to have rules. People have to follow them. The member needs to understand that. Everybody. There isn't a separate group of people that doesn't have to follow them. There isn't somebody in an elevated position that's above those rules. And so when I let my mask slip down at the Toronto airport, I apologized immediately, and I'd encourage the member to take ownership of the fact that he did organize a rally, maskless, too many people, broke the health rules, and he has yet to apologize for that. Now, I can tell that the member's defensive about this, and perhaps he would argue it wasn't his fault, it was the IBW guys that showed up, not him. But he was there, and he asked them to show up. So I think he was accountable at a pivotal time, when we were trying to make sure that people were following health orders and we were seeing increasing challenges. Our enforcement officials were telling us that people were challenging them berating them. I think in a couple of cases actually physically involved with them, and this is not on. So when I go out to make an announcement on enforcement, it's not a small thing, and it's an important thing. And when I go out to make an announcement about Canada's leading sick leave program, that's not a small thing. That's an important thing. And these things all fit together. And so I respect the fact that he thinks that this is a political gotcha moment and that he can nail me for not being at 2 announcements, but he forgets to mention that I've been at 125 plus. So I think on balance, it would be fair to say that I've been pretty accessible to the media and to answer any questions that they may have throughout this pandemic, and I plan on continuing to do that very thing.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So again, where was the Premier on Sunday? It's a very important announcement. It affects so many families across the province. Where was he that he couldn't help Manitobans understand what was happening?
The Honourable First Minister.
And I've told them before, and I'll tell them again, I'm accountable to my wife for my everyday activities and my whereabouts. I'm not accountable to him. I can only tell him that I worked a good part of that day, and I continue to work, and I will work on this pandemic, not exclusively on this pandemic, but on a number of other fronts as well. I did convey to him, for example, last Friday, that following a call with Chrystia Freeland, I can use her name here, Mr. Chair? Okay, with the Finance Minister, and again, I endeavor to communicate with the member openly about issues. On the sick leave, I communicated with him, and I have continued to urge the federal government to step up their sick leave plan. I communicated with him that we had communicated our frustration with the qualification period issue. The federal government has made it very, and I didn't elaborate on this, but I should. Here's what the federal government did, and on this I can draw a little bit on my insurance background. There's a thing called a deductible period sometimes that people understand. I think I'll use disability insurance for an example, where you self-insure for a period of time and then the insurance company starts to pay for your disability if you're sick or you're hurt or whatever. Not to get into the weeds too much, I hope, but just to say, if that deductibility period where you're self-insuring is a longer period, then the insurance is a lot cheaper because the insurance company isn't taking on the risk. That's what the federal government did to us on sick leave. Exactly. They made it harder for people to get it in the first week. They made it harder because they put in a clause that said you can collect only if you miss up to 50% of your scheduled work week. Well, how the heck does a person know that? I mean, come on. And I really took offense to that, and I shared with the member, and I hope he would admit this, that we talked about that, and it was really frustrating to me and other premiers too, that they would put in this clause when the very idea of a sick leave program is to discourage people from having to go to work by making sure that they have confidence that they're getting some, they're not sacrificing a paycheck. That means a lot. I've lived a good part of my life in a household where that mattered a heck of a lot. And when the federal government came out with this plan and I saw this qualification deductible period in there, I was not happy. What they did was they cheaped the plan. Yes, yeah, when we talked about it. What the federal government did there wasn't, and they've done a lot of good things. And I have a lot of time for Chrystia Freeland, and I do not want this to be misconstrued as a whack at her. It's not. But they could have made that plan so much better, and that's what they undertook to do. The federal government told us months ago that that plan would have a budget of about $5 billion, right? The sick leave plan. Do you know what the budget allocation is in the recent federal budget? Less than $1 billion. And part of that reason is they made it harder for you to qualify for it in the first week. So this is the issue I shared with the member, and I continue to say that the federal government should have designed that plan so it was more accessible to Canadians. They failed to do it. The premiers now have to act in response to fill that gap. We've taken that action. Premier Horgan took action this week. We took action last Friday. This wasn't a small announcement, and that's, I guess, what I'm trying to get across to the member. I take this very seriously. That sick leave issue is one we pushed very, very hard on, and I appreciate the member's support on it very much, because it is an important issue. And it could be argued we should have done it ourselves earlier, but we had it undertaken by the federal government that they were going to design a plan. When they came out with it, just I think about 3 weeks ago now, it had this flaw. And we thought, well, let's keep going at them on it, and maybe they'll change their minds. We successfully got them to change their minds earlier on a couple of things. I'll mention one, which was, the member will remember this, the wage subsidy program. Remember when they first came out with the wage subsidy program, the Feds said that, okay, I'll go quick, Mr. Chair. Just the Feds said that this would be, they'd cover 10% of wages. Remember this? They'd cover 10% of wages. Well, I think Premier Kenney also spoke up on this, said, you won't have to worry about administration costs on that plan. You won't have anybody applying. And they, to their credit, they changed their mind and they boosted the payment amount to 75%. Now, there's lots of problems with the wage subsidy programs being well reported now in the Globe and Mail and places like this. But the fact is, at least it's workable for businesses that need it. But the sick leave program, maybe in the longer term, if you have to be off for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, can work. But in that first week, that critical week, not so much. That's why we designed our plan to fill that gap.
The Honorable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So again, a final time for the purposes here this afternoon. With respect to the school announcement, where was the Premier on Sunday that he couldn't attend it and help explain to Manitobans why it was happening?
The Honorable First Minister.
Again, I will just simply say to the member that I believe that having the education minister involved with Dr. Roussin in that announcement was the right thing to do. I took a lot of criticism about 3 years ago from particularly, I think, the Winnipeg Free Press, when I chose not to go to the international Normandy, I don't know what to call it, D-Day gathering. I went to 8 other events. I went to more than every other premier combined, okay? But I got criticized for not going to that event because I chose to have a veteran from our caucus go instead. I believe that was the right thing to do, and I believe having the education minister there for that announcement on Sunday was the right thing to do too.
The Honorable Leader of the Official Opposition.
So again, you know, the trend, the theme is that the Premier is not there on the difficult days. Last Friday, new public health restrictions are announced in the evening. He's not there. Sunday, he's not there. We can go back over the past year and change that the pandemic has been in effect, and this is a reoccurring phenomenon. We know that in May 4th, 2020, there was an announcement made by government that they plan to cut $860 million from Crowns, schools, post-secondaries. You know, the PCs, I guess, got excited in all their talk about Government 2.0, but the part that they overlooked was having the leader of the province come out and explain to Manitobans why there should be the single greatest one-day cut in our province's history. So again, May 4th, 2020, where was the Premier that he couldn't be present at that announcement?
The Honorable First Minister.
2 things. First of all, the member's imagining an announcement that never happened and never took place. Secondly, that was the week my sister passed.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
I withdraw. If there's a legitimate reason, absolutely understandable. In August of 2020, on August 21st, there was a spike of cases in Prairie Mountain Health that led to health restrictions being announced. The Premier was not present at that announcement. Where was he on August 21st that he couldn't be there for that announcement to help people in Brandon and across the rest of Prairie Mountain understand what was happening?
The Honorable First Minister.
Member can do his research and find out if any premier's been more available than me. Until he does that, he'd best not talk about where I wasn't. He should talk about where I was instead. And where I've been throughout this pandemic is at work. And where I've been every weekend since last February is at work. And where I'm going to continue to be throughout this pandemic is working on behalf of Manitobans in every way, shape, and form that I can to address the issues this pandemic creates. I have not taken time off. I have not been away. I have not been in my cabin in northwestern Ontario. Okay? One time, 1 2-day period with my wife at that cabin. That's it. Maybe the member would like to share his schedule with the committee, and we can compare notes. Okay? In the meantime, I'm going to stay focused on the job. I got a lot of other things to do. If the member wants to keep going on this innuendo stuff, we can keep going on it. If he wants to ask questions about any department of government, I'll do my best to answer them, as I always do. But there's a pandemic on right now, and I think rather than trying to score political points with innuendo, we should get to some serious questions about some serious issues.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
This afternoon, the Premier has stated he is accountable for public health restrictions. Public health restrictions were announced for Prairie Mountain on August 21st, 2020. The Premier was not there to answer or to offer that accountability. Where was he? Why wasn't he there to help people across Westman, Parkland region understand that announcement?
The Honourable First Minister.
I'll double check my schedule, but I think I was actually in Brandon, and I did interviews with the media that day. We can double check if the member would like. So on the issues of accountability, I did media interviews in Brandon. I believe we can double check, I think that week, but I'm happy to tell the member that I've been accountable throughout this entire pandemic, and that his thesis that I somehow am not here in difficult days doesn't bear up to scrutiny, because I can tell him that every day in this pandemic has been a difficult day, and I've been here, and I'm not sure he has.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
In a similar vein, to prove the thesis that the Premier doesn't show up for the difficult moments, on September 25th, it was announced that COVID cases in Manitoba and in the capital region were leading Winnipeg to be moved to code orange. It was also significant because that's the date that a mask mandate came in for that region. Premier was not available that day to explain the restrictions that he says he is accountable for. Where was the Premier on September 25th that he wouldn't make that announcement?
The Honourable First Minister.
As I said to the member earlier, I don't ever stop thinking about this pandemic, so he can be sure that I was working. I can also tell him that if he'd care to talk to Ed Schreier or Gary Dewar, Greg Selinger, who I should note was just honored with an appointment to the Order of Manitoba. Congratulations to Mr. Selinger and others. If he would care to talk to any of them, he may find that there are many duties to the Premier's responsibilities are many, and I can assure him that I wasn't at my cabin in northwestern Ontario fixing it up or anything like that. I was on the job, so I don't know. The member wants to keep going on this stuff, but he won't tell anybody whether he hit his record from the NDP or not prior to the 2016 election. I think that's a pertinent thing to come clean on, and it is a simple question. Did he hide his record from the NDP when he was interviewed as a candidate in 16? I mean, people had to run against him, right? Rana Bakari, right? Ran against him, put a record out there. She was the leader of the Liberal Party at that time. She was subjected to a lot of criticism. I remember the NDP ridiculing her. Yeah. Present member for Southdale, who was running in that riding. A woman who's faced considerable challenges in her life, risen to those challenges, worked her tail off, put her record out there, honest person. She put a record out there, Rana Bakari put a record out there, the member opposite hit his record, got elected, thinks that's a win. I don't think so. So somebody covered up his record because it wasn't out there. So was it him or was it his party? Which one? Simple question.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
September 25th, the capital region of Manitoba was moved to Code Orange, a significant escalation in public health restrictions, a move that impacted a large number of Manitobans. The Premier was not present. A short time later, unfortunately, the decision was made to move the Winnipeg Health Region to Code Red. Thousands of businesses were forced to close. They were forced to reduce their capacity. Again, this was a significant moment. And the Premier states this afternoon that he is supposed to be accountable for public health decisions, public health restrictions. Yet again, he was not there for the Code Red announcement. Where was he? Why was he not present for the announcement that Winnipeg would be moving to Code Red?
The Honourable First Minister.
I can only say to the member, I have repeatedly said to him, I'm on the job all the time. I've been available to the media through the mechanisms we use on a regular basis, I think all but 2 weeks since February of last year. One of those weeks I was in Ottawa meeting with federal officials, lobbying for a variety of Manitoba-centric issues. I can also tell him that as a government we have taken not dozens, not hundreds, but probably thousands of issues of critical importance to Manitobans through this pandemic. And that I have a cabinet that I trust and that I respect, who is diligent and hardworking and who makes every effort to fulfill the responsibilities of their duties. We make those duties clear. It's the first government in Manitoba history to actually put out our mandate letters so the public can see them, the opposition can see them, anybody can see them. And so I expect my cabinet members to pursue, and they are pursuing with diligence, their responsibilities. So it's a team of people. Now, the member may think it's just about him. It's not. And he may think it's just about me. I don't think that. I come from a team background, and I think there's a team that should be given the opportunity to work, and they do, and they work hard. And so, you know, I can only say to the member, that dog don't hunt. And he can keep going on this all day if he wants, but I got a lot other more important things to do. So if you'd like to get to some issues, I'm more than happy to address any issue he'd like to raise, but if he wants to keep talking about where I was on a given day, I can only tell him what I've told him several times. I'm working.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
The Code Red announcement that I'm talking about is significant because we remain under Code Red to this day. This was a significant moment in the pandemic period, and the decision is one that the Premier says that he should be held accountable for. One of the moments for accountability, and again, let's remind ourselves, accountability doesn't necessarily mean it's a tough question. It just means explaining what's going on. So given that that was such a pivotal moment in the pandemic for Winnipeggers, for people in the region, Manitobans have a right to know why the Premier wasn't there. Where was he? What was he doing that was so important that he couldn't be there for the move to Code Red for Winnipeg?
The Honourable First Minister.
I was working. Accountability that the member speaks of extends to him as well. He needs to be accountable. Why did he keep his record secret from the NDP when he decided to stand as a candidate in 2016? He's accountable to answer that question too. He hasn't. He won't, because he thinks that accountability only works when he raises it as an issue to hit me with. I'm happy to be accountable. I've told him I've answered his questions. I'll keep answering them. I'm working every day. I keep it. I keep it going. The member wants to share his schedule and try to compare notes. I'm happy to have him do it. If he wants to share the facts about his non-disclosure of his record, to his party, he should share those. He shouldn't continue to cover them up, because that's deceit. It's deceitful. How would you feel, Mr. Chair, if you'd contested Fort Rouge, put your record out there, worked your tail off? You know how hard it is. Campaigns are hard. COVID's harder. Campaigns are hard work. You go out and you work your tail off. You know that. Walking, knocking, encouraging people, helping them, trying to get some volunteers together. All that work was done by Rona Bakari, tossed away by this member opposite because, well, he didn't think it was important to put his record out there, his truthful record. Present member for Southdale, same thing. Family comes here with nothing, makes something of her life, invests of herself, gives of herself, works her tail off, pursues her education, becomes a professional, decides that she wants to get into public service, puts her record out there on the line, lays it out, and then goes out in an area, not a traditional strong area for Conservatives to get a lot of support. She went out there and worked her tail off. Honest woman. The member didn't choose to put his record out there. He chose not to. That's a conscious choice he made. He thinks he won. But did he win with dignity? That's a question only he can answer. I have my views, but that's a chance for him to reflect. And he should reflect on it. Because everybody, I hope everybody, gives the gentleman opposite the chance to prove he's a new man. That's what I'd like to see him do now. I'd like to see him admit that was a mistake. And if he did disclose his record and the NDP covered it up, he should say that. And I'd have a lot more respect for him if he'd do that than if he dodged the question and dodged the issue like he's doing right now. Because I just don't think what he did to those two women was right. And I think there's people in the NDP that don't know it was wrong too.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
Premier says he will answer questions. Let's see if he will answer this question, or whether he will dodge it. Where was he when the announcement was made to move Winnipeg to Code Red? What was he doing that was so important that he couldn't explain to Manitobans and Winnipeggers in the capital region about why we had to move to a lockdown?
The Honourable First Minister.
So again, the member wants me to explain to him every hour of every day where I was. That's what he's asking. When an important thing happened during the pandemic. I'm not prepared to do that. I've answered the questions that he has asked. I have told him repeatedly that I'm working, and I am. And I'm not going to share. He can fit in my schedule, but just in the spirit of this thing, because he's not answering the single questions I've asked, I'm not going to share my schedule with him. He can FIP it if he wants to get it, and he'll find out where I was. But I was working. And he'll find that out when he FIPs. Now, I can't FIP him and his party's interactions. I can't, and I won't. I'm simply asking him a question. He decided to enter public life. He's got an accomplished record as a broadcaster. He's got lots of good stuff on his resume. But hiding the other stuff, you know, you don't get to pick and choose. That's fictional, right? You don't get to pick and choose. It's public life. You're accountable. Now, the member hasn't been asked about this. The media expresses little interest in pursuing these issues. I do have an interest in pursuing these issues from a non-political standpoint. I have an interest because I respect people that put their record out for public office. The member for Concordia put his record out when he entered the public domain, and he ran on that record. And to my knowledge, did not cover up anything about his past, anything. Other members of the House as well were forthright when they entered the realm of public life. They said, I want to put my name on that ballot. And I respect people that do that, regardless of political party. I always have, always will. But when you go and apply for a job in public service as an elected official, your record matters. And when you cover up that record, that speaks badly of you. And the member may not think so right now, but I hope he reflects on this after. And I hope he realizes that I am actually doing him a favor by giving him the opportunity to be frank about these issues. I'm giving him, no, he can continue. This is a cancerous situation for the member. He does not understand. He has people in his own party who understand that this is the issue he must confront. And should he fail to do so, it will follow him around. And I'm giving him the opportunity. There's no election. There's no election for years to come. The member could clear the air, and he should. And if he would do that, Manitobans are forgiving, supportive people. Simply say, I made a mistake in covering up my record. And here is my record. And, you know, please give me a chance. Manitobans will do that. But if the member keeps following this line, and I hope he reflects on this in years to come and looks back on this moment, because I want him to know sincerely that what I am suggesting he do is the right thing to do. And if he would do it, it would help him so much, because people would give him the gift of forgiveness. He would have that in a second. He would have it from me. I think he'd have it from the lion's share of the people of the province of Manitoba. He'd just simply come clean and tell the truth about his record. But he did not do that in the 2006, unless he did. Maybe he did. I've tried to give him the chance to say that. Maybe he did. But I don't know that, because he's simply not addressing the issue. I think that's a shame. I genuinely think well of the member. Our interactions, I think, for the most part, apart from question period, which is bad theater most of the time, and he knows that, our interactions have been, I think, have been sincere. I'm sincere in saying this now. I think the member makes a mistake in continuing to cover up his record, and in failing to answer the question about whether he did or did not make that record available to the NDP, he's missing an opportunity to move forward. He's missing an opportunity to begin to heal. He should pursue this now, because he's got lots of forgiveness in front of him if he does, and if he doesn't, it's just going to grow. The issue's going to grow.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
You know, when you run for public office, you make a commitment to the people of Manitoba to be there for them, not just on the good days, but also on the bad. It's remarkable the lengths to which the Premier will go to evade answering the question, where is he during those difficult moments? The Premier tries to act like every single moment is created equal. We've gone through some of the more difficult moments of the pandemic. He was absent time and time again. Doesn't want to answer the questions about where he was, what he was doing, why couldn't he account for the decisions that he says today he should be held accountable for. I've asked about Code Red, Code Orange, Westban, asked about the recent announcement, so on and so forth. It's clearly a trend. Manitobans across the province, in Winnipeg, Brandon, rural Manitoba, northern Manitoba, for all of us, we were moved by the situation at the Maples Personal Care Home. This is one of the more difficult moments of the pandemic. In the aftermath of that decision, which only came to light because of a paramedic posting anonymously on social media, there were a number of press conferences, and the Premier was not present. Where was he, and what was he doing that was so important he couldn't address the crisis that had unfolded at Maples Personal Care Home in November 2020?
The Honourable First Minister.
Every week, I could stand corrected on this, I think, but since February of last year, I have made myself available to all media to ask me any question they wish, including questions on Maples. the member wants me to be faulted for not being there on a day he picks, failing to credit me for the days that I've been there to make myself available to the media on a weekly basis from the beginning of this pandemic and prior. I'm not going to buy it, and I don't think anybody else is going to buy it either. The reality is that there have been, in terms of health orders, I believe 15 different announcements. I think I have been at 12 or 13 of them this year. So, look, when you're going out every week, as I am, and taking questions from the media, regardless of what you choose to announce. I mean, we can announce things the media doesn't ask about, right? That happens all the time. The member knows, you know, he'd like to go out and spin a certain message someday, and the media doesn't buy it, so they don't go with the story. In our case, we make announcements. We hope the media treats us fairly, and then they ask any question they want. Any question at all. That's accountability. Accountability is making sure that you're available to answer questions from the media, and I have been, and I will continue to. Accountability is also making sure that you put your honest record out there when you stand for public office. Lack of accountability is when you hide your record. I asked the member again, did he hide his criminal record from the NDP when he chose to try to enter public life before the 2016 election? Yes or no?
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
The crisis at the Maples Care Home was significant. It's one that Manitobans wanted to discuss, have explained to them, ask who was accountable. There were a number of press conferences organized by the government, including on that weekend. The Premier was not present for any of them. Where was he? What was he doing that was so important? He couldn't talk to Manitobans and at least just speak to them at one of the darkest hours of the pandemic.
The Honorable First Minister.
Again, the member throwing stones from a glass house hasn't answered the simple question, did he hide his criminal record from his own party prior to the 2016 election? I'll ask him another question. Did he hide his criminal record from his party prior to deciding to enter the leadership campaign in 2017?
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
Where was the Premier and what was he doing on the weekend the Maples personal care home tragedy came to light, that he couldn't speak to Manitobans and just help them understand what was going on?
The Honorable First Minister.
The member put out a book in 2015 where he only referenced one of his criminal charges and covered up all the rest.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
Where was the Premier on November 7th and November 8th of 2020? As the Maples personal care home tragedy came to light, the government organized numerous availabilities with many people, none of whom were the Premier, none of whom were the Leader of the province. What was he doing that was so important that he couldn't speak to Manitobans and offer some consolation during their time of need?
The Honorable First Minister.
Yeah, two points. One, the health minister at a news conference, I think on the day he's referencing, our health minister is accountable and responsible for health issues in our province. But I guarantee the member that I was available that week to the media because I did weekly press conferences where I was available to answer any single question that they chose to ask. Where I was working. Where I continue to be is working. where the member is going is not working.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
There were many emotions felt by people in Manitoba the weekend that we learned of the Maples Personal Care Home tragedy. The idea that seniors could die of dehydration in the province, that there was neglect, that there was unanswered questions, these are all very disturbing to people. I'm sure they're disturbing to the Premier as well. What Manitobans were looking for at the moment was leadership. The Premier sought the job of being leader of the province. It seems to me it's reasonable that the Premier would show up, at least on one of those days, to start to help Manitobans comprehend what had taken place. If not to offer accountability immediately, then perhaps at least to offer consolation. What was the Premier doing that was so important that he couldn't be there? Why wasn't he present?
The Honourable First Minister.
Well, a couple of things. The issues around that the member wants to score political points on are sad issues, tragic issues, perhaps some of the most tragic of the entire pandemic. So, I think the member's revealing himself and trying to achieve political gain at the expense of such an issue. Secondly, I would say we were in session, if I recall, at that time, so clearly I was in the question period every day, and he could have asked me any question he wanted. Thirdly, I was make myself available to the media every week, so the questions that, any questions that might have been generated as a consequence of that issue, which was not a two-day issue, by the way, but an ongoing issue, could have been raised, and I expect were.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
It's very clear that there's a trend here. And the more significant moments, the more challenging moments that Manitobans have seen over the past year, the Premier has not been present. Laying out a case here. These are not the sole examples, but these are the significant examples. When Prairie Mountain was moved to Code Orange. When Winnipeg was moved to Code Orange. When Winnipeg was moved to Code Red. When we saw Maples. When we saw the most recent announcement, the impacts of the third wave. Two separate announcements, very chaotic rollout. Manitobans wondering just on that level alone, what is going on with their government? And neither one of those announcements, which typified and embodied the chaos and disorganization of this current administration, was the Premier present. It's a legitimate line of inquiry. It's an important question to get to the bottom of. Why was the Premier not present for any of those moments? Those are the moments when it's important to speak to people, to help them understand what's going on, to help them cope, to help them chart a course forward. And yet the Premier was absent in each and every one of them, and in more. So why is it the Premier only wants to be there for the good announcements, but not there during Manitobans' times of greatest need?
The Honourable First Minister.
So there's a number of errors in the member's assertion. When I say his dog doesn't hunt, I'm telling him that if he looked at the facts, but he's not interested in looking at the facts, he'd find that I did, I think, a dozen announcements on health orders this year, including on November 10th. So he's false in his assertion on that. I can also tell him that I've been available to the media every single week since the start of this, with I think 2 exceptions, and I stand corrected on that, maybe 3, maybe 1. And so I've been accountable in that respect. His job is to make me accountable. He's trying to do it now with a false accusation. What he needs to do is work with facts if he wants his thesis to fly, and it won't fly. So I can only say to him, there aren't any easy announcements. There aren't any easy press conferences. There's no such thing. He's hypothesizing about an imaginary thing. He's trying to suggest that I do the easy work, and he's missing the point. And the point is, there is no easy work. It's a global pandemic. It's a son of a gun for every single Manitoban. We've done dozens of hard announcements. We've done dozens of restrictions. It's not easy to go out and tell people you're going to ticket them. You kidding? It's not easy to go out and tell people they can't get together in their backyard, but I've done that. It's not easy to take away Christmas, and I've done that. And I'll keep doing it. And the member tries to score political points saying I'm not there in the hard times. I've been there all the time. I've been attacked for being there too much. According to the Winnipeg Free Press, I'm the face of the pandemic. How do you do that unless you're there when the difficult, ugly, tough decisions are made, and sometimes, most of the time, when they're announced on the day they're announced? But even though the member may be correct in saying some of my colleagues have been involved, that's because we have a team. Does he? Does he? And if he has a team, did he tell his team all his criminal offenses? Do they know what they are? Or is he hiding them from them too? Do they know his record, or is he still hiding? He hid it from his party before he ran for office. If he hadn't, he would have said so by now. He hid it from his party when he decided to seek the leadership, and only when someone on the other campaign's team started to come out with some things did some of this stuff come to light. Some of the real things in his background, things that were never out there for the first 2.5 years after he decided that he was going to enter public life. And the member knows that he's been treated with kid gloves all the way through this time. And I'm giving him the opportunity to come clean, because that ain't going to go on forever. And the sooner he confronts the reality, the sooner he owns up to his past mistakes and apologizes for them and accounts for them, the better for him. If he doesn't choose to take this advice, what comes around goes around. My record's an open book, not a fictionalized work, the real thing. And if the media wants to ask me a question about any issue, they've had opportunities on a weekly basis to do that. And that's called accountability, and I'm happy to do that. If the media decides to ask him some questions that are tougher once in a while, that would be a change. That would be their choice. But I've asked him only a couple today, and he hasn't answered them. And that demonstrates again to me that he's not ready to be accountable, not ready to accept the personal responsibilities that go with the job I have. If I had an overpaid speeding ticket, it'd be on the front page of the Winnipeg Free Press. Everybody in this province knows that. Every single person who reads the Free Press knows that. I'm accountable. I'm made accountable. And I like to be accountable. And the member refuses to be accountable. And that is to his detriment. Because if he would finally come clean on why he decided to enter public life while hiding his own personal record from the voters of the riding he was running in, that would help him. But he refuses to accept the opportunity, to his detriment. On the issue of personal care homes, I can only say, before this pandemic struck, we had, as a government, significantly increased the amount of investment in personal care homes beyond what was happening under the previous NDP administration. Just about a 50% increase in the amount of investment in personal care homes, adding beds, eliminating the waiting times that people had to get into personal care homes, addressing that, safety and security upgrades.
The Honourable First Minister's time has expired. The Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So it's pretty clear that there is this pattern of the Premier not wanting to show up for Manitobans during the difficult moments. Sober assessment of the pandemic would highlight some of the clear turning points of what's been going on this past year. Prairie Mountain, again, that was a difficult moment for folks in that region. And there were a lot of questions. We heard them all. People in Brandon concerned about what the rising case counts, what the impact of the outbreak at Maple Leaf meant for them. People in other parts of the region. It's a very large region, right? All the way from American border up to Swan. People in some of those other regions wondering about the effects on them. Premier was absent from that. Winnipeg, unfortunately, started to see rising case counts again after that. Saw us move up the color-coded scale. A lot of concern, a lot of questions. Yet the Premier was absent at that moment. Unfortunately, things escalated from there in severity. We moved to Code Red. Premier again was absent from the announcement on Code Red. These are all announcements about public health restrictions, things that restricted Manitobans, which were being made with justification, but sometimes that justification requires explanation and explication. That's the substance of accountability. Unfortunately, Code Red, the case counts that came along with that wave, later resulted in the tragedy at Maples, for which the Premier was absent. He was absent also for other announcements more recently, including those on Friday, bringing in the latest public health restrictions, and the announcement to move schools to remote.
Order, please. The hour being 5 p.m., I am interrupting the proceedings. The Committee of Supply will resume sitting tomorrow morning at 10 a.m.